Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Professional Development, What Works and What's on the Horizon. My name is Jessica Fredston-Hermann, and I oversee Overdeck Family Foundation's Exceptional Educators portfolio, dedicated to improving teacher effectiveness and the sustainability of the teaching role so that all children across kindergarten through ninth grade experience rigorous, engaging, and accessible instruction that enables them to learn and thrive. Early in my career, I had the privilege of serving as a middle school teacher in California. And through that experience, I know firsthand just how much teachers are asked to do every single day and how critical it is that the time they spend in professional development is relevant, evidence-based, and actively supports them in meeting every student's needs. I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into this topic together today. We've gathered leading researchers and nonprofit leaders for a panel conversation unpacking the current and future state of K-12 professional development for teachers. We'll divide the conversation into two parts. First, exploring the current body of evidence to understand what we know works to date, including the markers of quality in curriculum-based professional learning. Leading this will be Dr. Megan McCormick, Overdeck Family Foundation's Research and Impact Officer, alongside the Research Partnership for Professional Learning's Executive Director, Dr. Stacey Alicea, and Senior Research Associate, Dr. Ariel Boguslav. Then the second half of today's webinar will sound a little different from our first half because it's more about innovation and experimentation. In this case, trying to leverage technology to advance the field toward a vision of professional learning that's informed by evidence and teachers' needs. So we'll learn more about some of the innovations that are on the horizon in an effort to make PD more relevant, timely, and beneficial for both educators and students. Joining us for that discussion will be Karim Farah, co-founder and CEO of Modern Classrooms Project, Chong-Hao Fu, CEO of Leading Educators, and Dr. Sarah Johnson, CEO of Teaching Lab. I'm very excited to dig in, but before we kick things off, I'm going to highlight just a couple housekeeping items. We'll reserve the last 15 minutes of today's webinar for Q&A, so please submit questions throughout the discussion. If you have a specific panelist in mind, be sure to note that so I can direct the question to the right person. And lastly, we're recording today's session, and we'll send a link to everyone who registered. Now I will hand things over to my colleague, Megan McCormick. Take it away, Megan.
Great. Thanks so much, Jess. Stacey and Ariel, it's great to see you both. So we're just going to kick off a question for Ariel to get us started. Can you describe the state of professional learning in the education sector right now? So how much PD are teachers receiving or not receiving? And are there any key trends your team has noticed in terms of structure, quality, and access?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Megan. So in terms of how much PD teachers are receiving, it's a little bit difficult to give you like an exact hours estimate, but we know that teachers typically are participating in multiple kinds of PD structures, and different structures, they do that with different frequencies. So teachers are most frequently participating in collaborative learning structures. These are things like professional learning communities and common planning time with other teachers that teach their same grade and subject. And they report doing that about 1 to 4 times a month, so on a pretty regular basis. Most teachers are also attending workshops and trainings, things that we would think of sort of more traditional professional development, and that's typically only a few times a year. And then about half of teachers are also receiving coaching, again, only a few times a year. The next question then, of course, is what do we make of these numbers, and is the typical PD experience effective at supporting teacher learning and development, or do they need more, or does it need to be different? And that question is a little bit hard to answer because it's difficult to systematically trace the impact of these specific experiences on teacher development and student learning. But we can talk about how these experiences align with what we know from the research about what high quality professional learning looks like, and also how teachers feel about the experiences. In general, teachers tend to report that PD experiences are moderately effective, and especially effective when they have more access to instructional expertise, which makes it notable and a little bit concerning that most teachers report that they don't have access to instructional expertise through professional learning. Teachers are also particularly positive about collaborative learning experiences, which they participate in most frequently. And we know that that collaboration is an important feature of effective professional development. But we also know that collaborative PD structures don't always have clear impacts on teaching and learning, and providing that space for collaboration is not enough to drive that development. The last thing I want to highlight about is that about 75% of teachers are either participating in no coaching at all or are participating infrequently, this few times a year, even though we know that coaching has the strongest evidence base for improving teaching and learning. So all of this gives us a decent sense of the typical teacher's professional development experience and some understanding of how that varies. Some teachers are getting much more frequent coaching, but it doesn't tell us a lot about why teachers' experiences might differ. And that is a key gap that Ripple is working to fill with some of our work. So we're trying to answer questions like, do some districts and schools offer teachers different kinds of PL opportunities than others? Are there some that are providing lots of coaching and lots of other things, and other schools that are providing much less? Are districts and schools choosing to provide different kinds of PL opportunities to different groups of teachers, like offering more professional learning to earlier career teachers or to teachers in tested grades and subjects? And then also, of course, what's the role of teachers' choice in the professional learning experiences that they end up participating in? These are all really important questions for understanding the forces that are shaping teachers' experiences, and therefore for identifying opportunities to change them. But we don't really know the answers to any of them. So we have several studies that are beginning to answer some of these questions. In partnership with Teach for America, we're looking at how district offerings differ across the country, as well as how districts provide different things to different kinds of teachers within the district. We're also using national data to look at patterns and how spending on professional learning varies across districts and states. And then we're working closely with Baltimore Public Schools and Montgomery County Public Schools to really dig in deep into the district strategy and how that interplays with teachers' choice in the PL experiences that they get. So we invite you all to stay tuned for the results of these studies that will be coming out in the second half of this year and first half of 2026.
Yeah, sounds like you guys are pretty busy, but tackling a critical topic. And you folks can definitely learn more about some of these studies and the specific work at the link in the chat. So Ariel, you touched on something that I'd love Stacey to talk a little bit more about. We've all, I'm sure in this group, heard the phrase curriculum-based professional learning, or CBPL. But what does that mean exactly? And what does the evidence tell us about its importance and potential impact in the classroom? And I guess finally, what more do we really need to learn about professional learning to see real impact in the field?
So curriculum-based professional learning, or CBPL, is simply professional learning that's tightly aligned to high-quality instructional materials, or what we call HQIM. So it's not just about understanding the curriculum, it's about knowing how to use it well. And that means helping teachers adapt lessons for their students while staying true to the design and instructional intent of the materials. So what the research tells us to date is that when PL is anchored in high-quality instructional materials, rather than just having generic PL alone separated from curriculum materials, teachers are better equipped to deliver high-quality instruction. Meta-analyses show that pairing strong materials with aligned PL actually lead to greater improvements in student outcomes than either can alone. And we're seeing this play out in the field. So a recent study of California's schools that received extra support to improve early reading through better curriculum and teacher training and coaching, all aligned, found real results, right? Third graders in those schools made reading gains equal to about a quarter of a school year more than their peers. And so the takeaway here for Ripple is that when strong materials are paired with evidence-based PL, teachers and students do better. All that being said, despite the momentum around CBPL, there's a lot of inconsistency that remains around how it's defined and delivered. So one of the biggest challenges is that the field doesn't really have a shared vocabulary or framework for doing this work. And that's why we recently released a paper called Defining Curriculum-Based Professional Learning, Building a Common Language. This was a joint effort between Ripple and a number of our affiliate and member organizations, including Learning Forward, NERN, Rivet, and the Learning Policy Institute. And as a collective of organizations really leading the charge around how we support the PL ecosystem in this work, we came together to address this gap and to create a more solid foundation for the field. But there's still so much more that we need to learn, right? What formats work best and for whom? I think Ariel was speaking to that a bit. How do we balance fidelity to curriculum with the need for adaptation to meet students' needs? and really reflect their lived experiences. What is the right role for coaching, and how do system level conditions like leadership and coherence shape implementation of CBPL? These are the kinds of questions that Ripple's learning agenda is focused on answering. So as a field, we can develop a deeper evidence-based grounding of what works and for whom.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so challenging when there's such variation that you're seeing in your work on the ground. So, I guess to follow up on that question, are there specific markers of quality that educators should be looking for when selecting curriculum-based professional learning for their school or district? What questions should they be asking to providers and folks who are aiming to support their efforts to promote professional learning?
Right. I love this question because this is exactly what our paper is about. So it draws and aligns from frameworks that cut across all of the organizations who participated, in addition to others like the Council of Chief State School Officers and the Center for Public Research and Leadership and the Carnegie Corporation, right? We really looked across all of the frameworks being used in the field to really understand how we showcase alignment around what high quality CBPL looks like. And so educators should be really looking for 10 features. The first is that CBPL is collaborative. It's grounded in peer-to-peer work and not one-off workshops. The second, and Ariel pointed to this already based on the evidence, is that it's supported by coaching, ideally job embedded and responsive to teachers' needs. The third is that it's grounded in practice. It's directly applicable to classroom work and not abstract theory. It should be intensive and sustained, so not just one session, but ongoing cycles of learning, and it should be staged over time. It needs to match where teachers are at in the curriculum rollout, whether that's unboxing, right, enactment, sustained use. It should it should support instructional adaptation, which helps teachers meet students' needs without sacrificing the rigor embedded in the curriculum. It should be anchored in a shared vision. This really comes from leadership that aligns around broader instructional priorities and practices. It should support teachers in meeting individual student needs, really addressing how to meet the diverse student needs of their classroom in intentional ways. And finally, it should be led by strong leadership. School leaders really need to set the tone and make PL a priority. Wait, there's one more. I think that was 9. We should definitely be measuring for improvement, right? So if we're putting all this in place, how are we using data to drive reflection and adjustment? And then I think you were asking about questions. What are the right questions to ask? So if I'm a district leader doing this work, I want to ask questions around, is my PL explicitly tied to high quality instructional materials? Or what instructional materials am I using, and how do I help teachers apply them in practice? Will teachers have enough time, coaching, collaboration, those types of things needed to really engage with and adapt the curriculum for their students? Does your CBPL reflect what we know about the evidence base around high quality design, things like sustained, grounded in practice that I just mentioned? And how will we know if it's working, which was the last piece that I almost left off, but one of the most important. How do we know that it's working both for teachers and students? Are there ways that we'll be able to track and use that information to improve and get better over time? And so Ripple's also been doing some of this work. We currently have a toolkit out for thinking about how to implement CBPL around ELA, and we will be releasing something around math at the end of this year.
Wow, you guys are busy. I love this framework though for thinking about these indicators of quality. Seems like a useful just approach for folks to have as a tool to guide their decision making. And I really loved as a researcher myself, that last point about continuing to monitor impact and understand like how we can understand whether these things are actually improving outcomes for teachers and kids in the field. So, Ariel, I know that Ripple has more than 20 studies currently underway to more deeply understand what professional learning works for whom and under what conditions. What right now are you really hoping to learn from these studies?
Everything, Megan, everything that we can. I would say that our research studies address sort of 3 big buckets of challenges that are in the field right now. So first relates to the question that I answered earlier, which is that we have only this kind of patchwork understanding of the landscape and drivers of teachers' PL experiences. And so one group of our studies is really focused on strengthening that understanding so that we can understand both the key barriers and the key opportunities for improving PL experiences for teachers and then influencing student learning. So this group includes some of the studies that I mentioned earlier with Teach for America, looking at professional learning spending and working with Montgomery and Baltimore public schools. It also includes a growing portfolio of studies that are focused on understanding the landscape of AI in professional learning, including talking with some of the organizations that are presenting today about how they're incorporating technology. And so we're thinking there about how organizations are incorporating AI into PL, where there might be untapped opportunities, unanswered questions, and challenges that we might foresee as this technology is incorporated into professional learning. And we will be releasing findings from a survey of our network about how all of the PL providers in our network have been investing in AI and the early learnings that they've seen from those investments at the end of May. The second bucket or group of studies focuses really on building research and data infrastructure. And that's because one of the main reasons that we have this sort of patchwork understanding of the PL landscape is because of the patchwork nature of the data infrastructure for collecting regular and systematic data about professional learning. So the shared measures work that Stacey was talking about with the ELA toolkit for measures is part of this work. That has been focused on selecting and implementing shared measurement and data collection systems related to high quality curriculum-based professional learning and curriculum implementation that can be used across districts and PL providers. And the thinking here is that when everyone uses different tools and systems to capture what's happening in PL and the key outcomes of it, it can be really difficult to make sense of the data across different organizations because everyone's sort of speaking essentially a different language with these different tools. But when multiple organizations are able to come together and use the same measurement system, then it creates these new opportunities to engage in shared learning and synthesize across these different activities and studies in new and more coherent ways that we think will help the field get better. And then the other big area of work within this data and infrastructure bucket is focused around coaching. As I mentioned before, coaching has one of the strongest evidence bases. And even though we saw that relatively few teachers are participating in coaching, lots of districts offer it. So it's not that it's only a few districts offering it, it's that districts tend to only offer it to a small number of teachers or a small number of teachers uptake coaching. And so it is widespread in that way. But some districts have essentially no data about what actually happens during coaching. Some districts collect that data really idiosyncratically, and so it's really hard to make sense of, or it's all qualitative and would take lots and lots of time to sort of analyze systematically. And some districts have more systematic coaching data, typically in the form of coaching logs, but don't really have the resources to analyze that data in detail. And coaching logs tend to sort of give this high-level information about sort of how many hours did you spend? What general topic did you talk about with the teacher? But not really get into the meat of the kinds of strategies that coaches are using in their conversations with teachers and what they're helping them get better at. But that's the part that we know is going to have a big impact for teacher learning is the details of the strategies and moves that coaches are making with teachers. And so Ripple's work related to coaching research infrastructure is focused on using AI to automatically generate data about patterns in what coaches are doing in their conversations with teachers using recordings.
Oh.
And then the last bucket of work focuses on what I would call the details of effective professional learning. As Stacey mentioned, there's several features that we know are important for designing effective professional learning, like that it's collaborative, like that it uses coaching. But knowing about these features is really not enough on its own to implement effective professional learning. We know that collaboration or coaching are really important, but we don't know very much about the details about the kinds of collaboration structures and specific coaching strategies that are most effective for supporting teacher learning. And in both cases, we have studies of designs that are really impactful and studies of designs that don't work, where coaches are not that effective for driving teacher learning or collaboration structures don't. So Ripple is really working to fill these gaps in our understanding of the details by designing studies that are exploring different approaches to how these details are implemented. So we have 3 studies that are focused on different types of coaching. One of these studies is comparing more reflective coaching to more directive coaching protocols. 2 studies are looking at how coaches can incorporate data generated by AI about teachers' classrooms instruction to provide more tailored and effective feedback for teachers. And one study is also looking at AI-generated feedback that's given to coaches to tailor how they are providing support for teachers. And I need to make sure I say a big thank you to Overdeck for support in making those 3 studies possible. And then we have several studies that are focused on other aspects and kinds of PL structures, including looking at different kinds of routines for peer collaboration that can be embedded into professional learning communities and common planning time to support this collaborative aspect. How to think about balancing teachers' choice in the types and topics of PL that they participate in with school and district priorities that might need to be coherent across teachers, and how to balance building teachers' conceptual understanding with providing concrete instructional strategies, given that teachers have limited time in professional learning and we can't spend hours and hours learning about both of those things. So perhaps still busy, if not everything.
Yes. I would definitely point folks to the chat so that they can bookmark the Ripple Insights Hub so they can gain access to like real-time updates on findings as they're emerging. Given that there's so much happening in this space, particularly with these new advances in the technology, that's hopefully going to make a lot of this potentially more scalable, more impactful, and reach a broader set of teachers. So based on all this amazing work you guys are doing, it sounds like we have a good handle on what could potentially work when it comes to professional learning and development. And we're doing studies right now to figure out and test the way to make that kind of work at scale. But it also seems something that you raised is that too few teachers still have access to high quality PD. What barriers do you think stand in the way, Stacey? And what's the opportunity potential if we change this? What would that mean for teachers and students?
Right. So I think Ariel talked about all the ways in which we're trying to deepen our learning around this and build a stronger evidence base. But even when we do have strong evidence, I think there are real barriers that remain to implementing these practices. One of the biggest that we're going to be tackling over the next 3 years in our research alongside our network is around system coherence and especially instructional coherence. So the data that Ariel shared shows this clearly, right? When materials, coaching, leadership, and assessments are misaligned, even the best PL can't stick. It's not sticky. So just recently, I was at a state PL network convening, and 2 of our Ripple member organizational leaders, Chong-Hao, who we'll hear from later at Leading Educators, and Emily Freitag at Instruction Partners, presented how they're working to untangle these types of challenges in real systems. I think everybody was nodding their heads in that space, right? It was a room full of state leaders thinking about these complex problems. And I think it really showcased and underscored just how important coherence is and how much it matters. There are also the question of resources, not just how much is spent on PL, but how dollars are deployed. Are they really enabling coherent instructional systems, or are they funding disconnected efforts? I think we need to be paying more attention to that. And I think in addition to the potential of AI-enabled or enhanced PL, which Ariel also talked about, one additional promising movement gaining real traction that I think could help these efforts is strategic staffing. So that is rethinking how teacher roles, schedules, and time are structured to enable more and better PL that includes evidence-based features like collaboration and coaching and job-embedded PL. The key here is that we can reorganize roles and schedules and time, but if we don't couple it with effective evidence-based PL, then we're not moving toward our goal. And finally, I think you've said this, Ariel said this, I'll say it again, measurement is so key, right? We're often not set up to answer the most essential question of, is this working? Is it working for teachers? Is it working for students? And that's why Ripple is investing in the types of tools that Ariel was talking about to really help districts and PL providers not only track impact, but use the information to continuously improve. And so to me, the opportunity is huge. If we get this right, if we scale what works, if we build coherence, if we staff schools strategically, teachers will feel more supported, instruction will improve, students will benefit. This isn't just about professional learning, it's about building the systems that allow us to really make sure that great teaching is thriving and that our students are thriving.
So that's a great place for us to end. We'll pass it back over. Thanks so much, Stacey and Ariel. Super excited to keep monitoring all the exciting insights that are emerging from your work.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much, Stacey and Ariel, for sharing what we know works in the field of professional learning, as well as some of what we're still trying to learn. So next, we're going to turn it over to some of the organizations that are doing the work on the ground. Despite the newness of some of this technology, maybe actually because of it, we're really excited about what each of these organizations is doing in the field of professional learning. We know professional development for educators has remained largely unchanged for decades. And while that could be okay if everything was working well, as Dr. Ariel just shared, too many teachers still say they're not getting access to the type of supports that they need to feel well positioned and supported to help their own students in the classroom. So our hypothesis is that these new technologies have the potential to enhance what we think of as more traditional professional learning by changing the way teachers experience PD and the way they practice their craft, making it more relevant, optimizing teachers' time, and ultimately improving student outcomes in a way that can potentially be more cost-effective. So each of the organizations here with us today, Teaching Lab, Leading Educators, and Modern Classrooms Project, is testing new tools and methods as they work toward making this vision a reality. It's great to see all of you on the same Zoom screen. And I'm going to start with you two, Chong-Hao and Sarah. I know both of your teams have been experimenting with generative AI to improve instructional coaching, professional learning, and classroom practice, including curriculum implementation. How has this changed how teachers are experiencing PD, and what have you heard about how they're responding so far? And Chong-Hao, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. What a fun conversation. When it comes to teaching and generative AI, one stat that we've been obsessed with at our team comes from the Pew Research report, which said that says only 6% of American teachers think that Gen AI will be a net positive for students. And actually 25% think that it's might be a negative. And that's not what we believe at Leading Educators. And so we're trying to think like what accounts for that. And when we ask teachers and we ask district leaders, a lot of times it feels like a potential ed tech deja vu, that in fact we have like 2,800 ed tech products in the average school district right now, and many teachers don't know how to make sense of them. And so we ask ourselves, like, how can teachers really be the pilots and not passengers? And how can they really be thinking about the practice and the implementation that's going to make a difference for kids? And so with that, we didn't want to start from scratch. We wanted to start from our own research. We've been engaged with Ripple and a number of big studies, and we're really proud. We actually got What Works Clearinghouse Tier 1 evidence, which is the highest bar of evidence in the teacher professional learning space. And we've been interrogating that study to try to understand, well, what do we know about teacher PL, and how might AI interleave with that? And one of the key findings is we have our biggest impact, like Ariel was saying, when there's really strong coaching for teacher leaders. And we find that starts with at least 8 hours a year. Too little turns out to not be enough. It's kind of like boiling water. Like if we don't get to 212 degrees, the water's not going to boil. So at least 8 hours of coaching a year for teacher leaders, and at least monthly walkthroughs to principals, so that principals and teacher leaders are aligned in terms of improving the school system. That's what we call our recipes research. And so we've been digging into AI. We actually launched a national AI school teams collaborative where it's principals and teacher leaders working together to try to think through concretely, well, what is the instructional practice that we're going to improve? How might it allow us to work more efficiently and like actually change the role of the teacher? How might that allow us to improve practice and improve mastery? And then most exciting, we're seeing in a lot of schools now, actually places where they're reinventing and doing much more authentic real world experiences. And that's been really, really exciting to see. And I'm excited to share some more examples as we get into the conversation.
I'm excited too. I love that analogy of like what you need to just get the water to start boiling and then start seeing something happen. Sarah, could you share a little bit about what you've been doing at Teaching Lab and how educators have been responding so far in terms of the work with generative AI?
Absolutely. So it will come as no surprise to anybody that we live in incredibly dynamic times right now. Someone told me the other day that it's a high VUCA moment, which stands for like volatility. The C is chaos. We can look it up. But we're in a high VUCA moment. And I think we've kind of been in a high VUCA moment since the pandemic. And what I've seen is a lot of really fast shifts with teachers. So 2 years ago, we stood up an innovation studio at Teaching Lab. And at that moment, we were defining the words AI for teachers. We were sometimes their first entry point into using a chatbot. We were like, this is what a GPT is. Here is, you can use the screen and like ask a question, et cetera, right? It was very basic. And now when we go into schools, we see teachers using AI for all kinds of use cases. They are generating their own lesson plans, they're grading student work, they are doing like innovative, interesting things like taking state test questions and creating more practice questions that are based on those questions. And then additionally, and this is more concerning, I see a lot of teachers accessing ed tech tools that have no evidence of impact whatsoever. And even when an instructional expert looks at, say, the lesson plan that one of these tools is generating, they would say that is not a high quality lesson. So I think one of the biggest risks with teachers using AI right now is, per Chong-Hao's point, there is not a strong standard of quality. And there's this giant gap in our evaluation mechanism between generating a resource with AI and actually evaluating if it's going to shift teacher practice and student learning in a positive way. So at our studio, what we do is we work with teachers and students to generate new AI tools, which are hyper-focused, really obsessed with solving two problems. One is, do we think that these products can have an impact? And that's both in terms of the quality of the outputs and the distal impact, improvements in teacher practice and student learning. And two, we're trying to solve the 5% problem. So the 5% problem is that EdTech tools are only used at the dosage required to get an impact 5% of the time. That stat is from the student level, but I bet that is true at the teacher level. And so we are trying to generate tools that are actually integrated into the authentic workflow of teachers. And the way that we do that is we convene teachers around some kind of goal. We convene teachers, for instance, around their shared use of a very popular math curriculum. We worked with them to identify their pain points, and then we actually teach them how to create their own GPTs. They get to do a really fun hackathon. And in doing this work together and in context, we learn a lot. So with that particular stream of work, that actually culminated in us creating our own product with the teachers. That product is called CoTeach, and it helps teachers use this very popular math curriculum. And it does a lot of the things that excellent coaches do with teachers. One of our power users said that sometimes you just like really need to talk things out. And so she, as a power user, she sends like 100 chats to CoTeach, just like asking questions about the curriculum, asking for advice about how to teach it, et cetera. Over 80% of teachers using that platform say that they're able to modify curriculum, but importantly, with rigor. And then our own evaluation shows that as well. The one more sentence I'll say about this particular example is we actually created this tool with teachers as an R&D tool. And we posted it just on Reddit forums and Facebook groups, and we now have 10,000 teachers using it. So I think that just speaks to the demand for AI-based tools from teachers and how far we've come since 2 years ago.
That's powerful. A lot of organic growth from teachers really trying to figure this out. And Sarah, you sort of started talking about some of the potential benefits of generative AI. I'm still thinking about that stat from Chong-Hao as well, about only 6% of teachers think that Gen AI will be net positive. And so I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more to that question of what are some of the biggest potential benefits of generative AI that you see when you think about PD and teacher practice?
Yeah, I think that 6% stat is probably driven by the fact that the first news about AI in education was kids are using it to cheat. And this like first impression of AI is kind of a weird interface, right? It's like a blank screen and this like little chat box, and you actually have to have kind of a lot of expertise in order to ask the right questions and get the right answers. We've seen teachers be extremely interested in AI when you don't lead with AI. So you have to lead with actually solving a problem that they want to solve, right? So I think that's why we have this very organic, fast uptake of CoTeach, because we spent all this time actually designing a tool that was solving authentic teacher pain points. And notably, we designed it with teachers, and now we keep getting feedback from teachers. So there's that. I also think there is a lot of friction in teaching and learning. And I think these are the top problems that I think that we have in education right now. So one, we can count on one hand the number of schools where 100% of students are reading, computing, just generally learning on grade level. We're not real about the fact that there is significant variability in how students access grade level content. And then we act like if we just give teachers enough support on using certain existing products, then we're going to get 100% of students to learn. And then finally, there's this very unhelpful debate about giving students access to grade level content versus personalizing learning. And the truth is we need both. We need high expectations for students, and we need personalized pathways to those grade level expectations. I think for the first time, technology could help us do that. And so I think that if we start actually solving that problem, getting every student learning on grade level and getting every student really excited to learn within an AI-enabled classroom, then I think teachers are going to get really excited about these products. What we're really passionate about is creating R&D sites. We have one school in New York that we're collaborating with on an AI-enabled math instructional model, and we're actually testing various AI tools sort of knit together. The teachers were very skeptical at first, and now they love it. And I was in the school yesterday, and I asked the teacher, how could we take this model and bring it somewhere else? And she was like, well, I was really skeptical at first, and I thought it was really weird. But now look, like the students are so happy. So I think once the teachers see the benefit of some of these tools, and again, we have to deliver on that benefit in a real way. It can't just be like, oh, look, we generated a lesson plan. It has to be like, no, kids are learning and kids are happier learning. Then I think they'll get more excited about some of these tools.
Okay, I know Kareem is going to have a lot to say on the personalized learning piece. Let's close out this section with Chong-Hao. I want to give you a chance to answer the question about some of the biggest potential benefits you're thinking about with generative AI when it comes to PD and teacher practice too.
Yeah, love everything that Sarah shared and co-sign on the experimental lab sites. For us, a lot of what at Leading Educators we have been focused on have been the value add of technology in teaching. And the value add of technology in teaching, or VAT, was a framework we actually created with the Google education team, with a team of global learning scientists and educators from around the world. And what was really helpful in that VAT framework is that from that team, we're able to distill a series of value adds that technology offers for teaching. There's what we call do more, which are efficiency plays. Not that we want teachers working harder, but there are actually a lot of efficiency plays here. Do better, which is more about targeted, relevant, the personalized pathways that Sarah was describing. And then do new, this kind of much more authentic possibility that's afforded by the emerging technology. So we've all had these amazing portraits of the graduate for what all the experiences that we want students to have. And now it's actually possible to live into those. And so just to offer a few examples of the VAT from our AI School Teams Collaborative, and these are all documented in AI strategy cards that have been produced from all of these schools across the country that are living into the possibility of AI to improve teaching and learning. So for example, in the Washington Leadership Academy, they are laser focused on redefining the teacher role and creating more efficiency, because we know the average American teacher works between 50 to 55 hours a week. And a lot of that time, the administrative, the operational, the planning can actually be reduced by AI to create more time for the things that only humans can do, like develop really meaningful relationships and develop the kind of learning environment that's going to nurture the success of every child. So how can we think about leveraging AI so that teachers can do more of what they do best? We have schools in New York that are thinking about math readiness, the way that Sarah just described, specifically around how AI can provide different on-ramps to grade level work. And then finally, Denver School of Science Technology, Zach Keneally, don't sleep on his work. He's been written about a lot in Ed Week. He's a member of the AI School Teams Collaborative that is thinking all about how civics engagement and emerging AI possibilities can come together to ensure that his class of high schoolers is solving the real civic challenges that citizens in Denver are facing. So for example, his whole class built AI voter registration tools right before the election and got thousands of people mobilized and living civics in the real world. So we'll chat those strategy cards, but it's really, really incredible what's coming up from schools across the country.
Thank you. I love that both of you have shared both examples of what your organizations are doing and examples of what you've seen on the ground from teachers. So Kareem, I know that the modern classrooms model is training teachers, including using their peers, to essentially flip their classrooms by recording instructional videos and designing mastery checks for students. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the modern classrooms model is helping teachers rethink their approach to curriculum-based professional learning, and then that last piece of how they're optimizing the time with students in class?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a privilege to be here. So thanks for having me, Overdeck team. And I think Sarah kind of alluded to where we sit at the Modern Classrooms Project, which is this kind of intersection of how do you actually differentiate or personalize learning for students while simultaneously keeping the rigor high and trying to imagine a world where those two things are not competing with each other, but are actually working together. So at the Modern Classrooms Project, my co-founder and I kind of created this instructional model when we were high school math teachers, and it's built around 3 core principles that Jess sort of alluded to. First is blended instruction, which for us is really the idea that you can digitize direct instruction so that students are not reliant on a sage on a stage kind of delivering content. What that does is then unleashes the ability to create a self-paced learning environment or a flexible paced learning environment where you walk into a classroom and some students are in lesson 2, some students lesson 3, some students lesson 4, all in service of a world where students are actually progressing not by time, but actually based on mastery. So they're not going to lesson 3 because it's Wednesday, they're going to lesson 3 because they mastered lesson 2. What we're ultimately trying to achieve is we want to showcase that curriculum, high quality instructional materials can be delivered with integrity while still actually differentiating to a huge diversity of learning levels. I think an excruciating amount of teachers walk into their classrooms every year, they see their roster, they look at the data about their students. They might be a 7th grade math teacher, but they know they're about to support a group of students that range from a 2nd grade math level to a 10th grade math level. So that task alone is daunting. Then they're given a really top quality curriculum and they're told to teach that curriculum on grade level to those students. And now that daunting task starts to legitimately feel unconquerable. And then it's in that kind of zone where you start to see a huge percentage of teachers make decisions because they feel like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, like reducing the rigor in teaching to the middle, abandoning key instructional routines in the curriculum, abandoning the curriculum altogether because they just don't know what to do, right? Do I either meet my students' needs effectively or do I teach this curriculum the way that it's written? And I think we're trying to imagine a potentially different world where when you pair curriculum with our model, you can actually truly differentiate and have the rigor that we would hope to see. And we think you have to do that by really thinking about how you optimize class time so that's maximized for one-on-one and small group interactions and allows you to hold students to mastery. And for a while at Modern Classrooms, that model I explained, the 3-part model, we were scaling actually curriculum, grade level, and content area agnostic, right? We would go around and we'd upskill teachers on this approach. They didn't go and have to figure it out with their particular curriculum in their context. And we found that while that is cool and all, it's extremely hard to do and doesn't actually create the coherence we're looking for. May not even be entirely aligned to the research that Ripple had shared. But actually the best way to do this is to pair our model with curricula. So what we're doing now is we're working with curriculum companies, we're focusing on math, we're actually taking their curriculums, we're building the adapted resources for educators to be able to deploy our model and implement that curriculum really effectively. So we're taking the curriculum, we might build slide decks and guided notes and mastery checks and every possible resource you would need to deploy our instructional approach. We're organizing that in a playbook. And then we're trying to deliver, really research-backed PL. So that's like a launch training to onboard, and then a lot of coaching supports throughout the school year to get them off the ground and running.
Well, that you brought it back to some of the changes you made while learning and growing from the model, and brought it back to that last piece that Stacey left us with in terms of the coherence. And while we're thinking about the research base that you're building on, can you speak a little bit to the evidence you've seen so far about the impact of your instructional approach? And what have you heard from teachers directly about how that's changed their work or even changed their relationships with students?
Yeah, so I think we've historically at Modern Classrooms seen 3 big things consistently. The first is we're shifting the way teachers teach, like the way they use time and space in the classroom pretty clearly. And I think the central shift that you see, and it comes up in the research and it comes up in the surveys and the classroom observation data, is a true ability to differentiate instruction. So, when we looked at modern classroom educators against, educators in the same buildings who are not using our model, you can see that our educators were substantially more capable of helping students catch up, serve all learning levels, use data to drive instruction. And since I've been leading the organization, my favorite data point is just around how much time teachers get to spend with their students. So when we compare non-modern classroom educators in school buildings, when we ask them, what percentage of you feel like you can spend a legitimate amount of time with each of your students during class, only 19% of teachers feel like they could do that. That's 1 in 5 teachers feel like they can really reach each of their students during class. 86% of modern classroom educators felt like they could do that. That's really what we're trying to unleash. What we didn't necessarily expect and then started to see is when educators implement our model effectively, they also have a much better perception of the profession. We know that educator burnout is on an all-time high. People find the job incredibly difficult. I would argue the job is substantially harder. It's clear they're working too many hours, right? And what we found is when an educator starts to implement our model effectively, they start to see what success can look and feel like. So when they go into the classrooms, they feel like the actions they're taking are actually contributing to meaningful impact. They feel like when they're planning, it's translating to real changes in the classroom. And I think that makes educators excited about the future. They feel like this unconquerable task got a little more conquerable, and now they're excited to come to school every single day and try to kind of push the work forward. And then finally, student outcomes. We've done a number of case studies, first on our curriculum agnostic instructional approach, right? Where we actually just trained educators and they figured it out. And we saw consistently in the environments that we had a lot of depth in, that when educators implemented our model effectively, they saw greater growth than the previous year and greater growth than their peers who weren't using our model. I think what's more exciting, frankly, is this is the first year we've been implementing our math curriculum aligned solution, and the interim assessment data has been pretty compelling to date, right? It's pretty clear that modern classroom educators who are using our curriculum adapted resources are just seeing stronger gains on interim assessments.
That's really exciting. And I really appreciate how much each of you brought in sort of an example of how this work can help make the role itself feel more sustainable, and that connection to the sense of effectiveness and building deep relationships with students and really meeting them where they are. So I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic from this portion. To close us out before we open up to Q&A, I know Megan asked our research friends a similar question, which I'd love to invite you to weigh in on as well. When it comes to PD implementation, I'm curious to hear what you think of as some of the biggest misconceptions or barriers to success in schools and districts right now. Like, what keeps this from happening well? And what opportunities do you see to address these challenges in order to increase impact on students and teachers? Kareem, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say something similar to what I just said, which I think the elephant in the room is the ability to differentiate instruction. Like when you talk to educators and you're not articulating how you're going to actually support them and meeting the needs of the students that are in front of them, frequently I feel like they check out. They're just like, not this again. Do you know my students? Do you know my environment? Do you know where I'm working? Do you know what my task is every single day? But I think under that I think is more sort of concerning that we need to address is the educators who implement HQIM really effectively are frequently making some major adaptations. They're not reducing the rigor, but they're making adaptations. And that's hard work and it's time-consuming work. And we cannot make the assumption that every other educator is going to make those adaptations. In fact, if we do, that's where you see the dangerous actions being taken, right? They're making the wrong adaptations. They're making adaptations that reduce rigor. They're making adaptations that are just ineffective. They're finding stuff online that doesn't work. They might be using AI tools that aren't really screened for effectiveness. So I think under all of this is really a need to invest pretty heavily in R&D around instructional delivery and design. We need to start really uncovering what are the models of implementation? I mean, in the classroom, how teachers use their time and space that are clearly effective and can be paired with HQIM. Modern Classrooms presents one. We're happy to pivot ours the more we learn about it, right? But we think that there should be a broader investment in this type of learning. And then we need to package content and PL through that model to make educators' on-ramp to implementation way more straightforward. And I think that's the biggest piece on our end.
Thank you. Sarah, what would you add or what do you see differently?
Yeah. So the research on AI from 5 other fields shows that for people that are developing their skills and expertise, AI actually improves their performance more than people that are at the top of their game. I think that has huge implications for teaching and learning. And this is why, although I'm not generally a tech optimist, I think if harnessed well, we can actually transform teaching and learning with this new technology. So I think one obvious misconception is there's a lot of naysayers and like doom and gloom and AI can be scary, etc. But I think what we tremendously need is to refocus on a radical goal, which is 100% of students can learn and 100% of students deserve to learn. And so what is the R&D required to get there? So I really appreciate Kareem because I think he came up with an innovative approach and he codified it. And now he's still doing research on it and he's still scaling it. But I think projects like this, obviously they should be scaled if they're better than the status quo, but I want more research projects where we're really trying to figure out how can we marshal this technology and the other resources that we have in order to meet this radical 100% goal. Related to that, I heard a political scientist talk about AI recently at Stanford, and he offered an analogy. And what he said is when you've got this new technology, a lot of people try to automate what humans can do. And so the analogy here is like, that's like a loom. But his question was, how could we not just automate what humans already can do, but how could we use this to augment what humans do? And augmenting is more like a crane. So a crane is a type of technology that can do things that a human cannot do on their own. So I think we need to leverage this moment for more breakthrough innovations that allow us to meet these moonshot goals. And in order to sort of like close this gap between the status quo and getting 100% of students to learn on grade level, I think we need more examples of MCP-like projects and more research wrapped around them. And like a sort of radical openness to what it will take to get there.
Okay, I saw a lot of nodding, Chong-Hao, but will you close us out with other thoughts and responses to this one?
Yes, this is so fun. I love getting to hear from Kareem and Sarah. So one thing that I think we get wrong is this notion that more is more. So we're going to offer teachers PD on multilingual learners, on coaching, on the curriculum, on supporting tier 2 instruction, and it just stacks. And we compare it to like, having to listen to every conversation in a restaurant and then being responsible for knowing what every single table said. And that's impossible. And this is, we know, going to be a time of reduced resources for schools. And so it's an incredible moment for focus and coherence. Stacey mentioned the state conference we were both at recently, and our friends at Instruction Partners realized and did some mapping. The average state requires schools to maintain 23 separate teams. One for safety, one for MTSS, one for curriculum, one for multilingual learners. That's not going to lead to coherence. We know from the Carnegie Foundation, the average first-year teacher in Baltimore was getting feedback from 18 different coaches. Like, that's also not going to lead to coherence. So how do we actually focus and agree on the most important things? And to the point of coherence, like if we actually take apart what's the good stuff in illustrative mathematics, we would know that all the math language routines come from Stanford scale to support multilingual learners. So how might we connect the dots between the design in the curriculum to all the things that we really want for kids? The second thing, at that same conference, we had all the state leaders practice teaching a 4th grade reading lesson. It was on the Boston Tea Party from EL Education. And it's actually much harder. Like you could see everywhere the nervous giggles start and the temperature go up. As soon as you said, we're going to actually practice and role play, that is really different from internalization. And I think too often we forget that teaching is a performance sport or performance art, and you actually have to practice. It's not enough to know better. You actually have to do better. And that requires actually embodying and practicing and making sure that the first lesson for kids is the best that we could possibly do, which often means practicing with other adults in safe environments or with AI.
Thank you. I love that comparison, thinking about teaching as a performance sport and how important it is to get practice opportunities before and during while we're bringing it in front of children. So thank you each. I'm going to welcome back all of our panelists to help answer some questions from the audience. As a reminder, we've had a couple come in already, but if you have questions for all of our panelists, you can submit that in the Q&A. So welcome back. And to kick us off, I'm going to start with a question that came in for researchers. Could you speak to the best way to measure effectiveness of PL?
I think I responded to this one in the chat that's a big.
Okay.
It's okay. I'm happy to say it again. It's a big question. I think there are many ways to do this. I think the thing that feels most important is, what is your theory of action about how your high quality instructional materials and your high quality professional learning, what we call CBPL, how you think those are going to help change your teachers' practices and in turn change student outcomes within your context, right? Your folks have an idea about that. You've laid out a plan for that and a strategy for that. Once you know what that is, you want to just align your measurement approach to match that. I think the toolkit that we've shared in the chat is a good starting point in terms of understanding a broad structure. It includes 4 dimensions, one of those being kind of the system conditions. Then we think, right, about that we need to have to be successful in implementing CBPL, thinking about the actual PL that you're going to be delivering, the quality of that PL. It then thinks a little bit about what are the things you're trying to change for teachers. And then again, as I mentioned before, what you change for student outcomes. So that's a good general frame, but within that, you have to customize to the subject area, I would say, or to any specific things you're trying to target.
Yeah, it's a concise answer to a tough question. Here's another question that's come in for our providers. So you can go off mute if you'd like to jump in on this one. Can you share examples of models that work in support of year-round participation by educators, if there's anything that you're aware of?
What do we think year-round means in this context, Jess?
From the phrasing of the question, my guess is through the summer, so like summer and school year training.
Mm-hmm.
I can share what we do. I mean, whether it's going to scale easily, we'll find out in the next 2 to 3 years. But we run a mentorship, we call it a mentorship program, essentially, where educators go through a launch training in the summer. That's where they sort of get onboarded onto the solution. But it's also when they get paired with their coach for the whole year. At that stage, like, you've learned the solution, but now you have someone who's going to support you as you sort of transform your classroom throughout the year. And then we couple that with two core supports, coaching calls. We tend to try to schedule them monthly with the educators, combined with 2 classroom visits per year, one in the fall, sort of while you're rolling our solution out, and then we come back in the spring and try to see growth. And then we have these optional community practices, communities of practice, where the educators can come virtually together and meet and discuss and kind of share their experiences. I don't think it's like super complex, but it is just a simple way to think about how you can structure the supports across the whole year, leveraging virtual and in-person models that I think so far have been effective. I do think the fundamental question, and I know Sarah and Chong-Hao know this, is just like, how do you scale something like that? Like, it can become quite expensive per educator, and like, especially in a financially challenging environment, like, where are the dollars to drive that at scale?
Yeah, but to build on that, I think it's worth it. So again, like the researchers keep saying that one of the highest impact interventions for teachers and students is teacher coaching. And I think a lot of the time we think of teacher coaching as very job embedded, and it should be. But again, we see teachers all the time that haven't been adequately trained on how to teach, middle school math or high school math, et cetera. So leveraging that summer time, I think, can be really transformational. At Teaching Lab, we say that the best partnerships start the year before. And so leveraging that time in the summer as much as you can get a hold of, and also convince leaders to treat that time as really sacred, so you can get teachers hitting the ground running on day one, I think is the right strategy and should be scaled because it's important. The other thing I'll add is we're excited to launch like a new summer school partnership at Teaching Lab. And so to connect like summer and year-round efforts to this sort of R&D challenge and this challenge of meeting like really ambitious goals, I think summer school and after school and innovative spaces like that can be spaces where teachers and students and their partners like us can start innovating these new models, so that we can have more MCP models out there, because they're generally sort of less constrained environments. It could also be a great place for teachers to try out AI-based tools in a sort of less constrained and safer space.
Yeah. We have a question coming in for Kareem, but Chong-Hao, is there anything you want to add specifically on the summer front? I know we answered somewhat expansively.
Nothing at this moment. Thank you.
Of course. So we have a question that came in specifically for Kareem. Christy noted that you spoke a lot about high school impact and was curious what differences, if any, you might see in implementing these models in elementary classrooms and with those teachers.
Yeah, so I mean, my high school reference is probably because I was a high school teacher, but actually the vast majority of the educators who implement our solution are in upper elementary and middle. We didn't even have the solution. We piloted actually in 4th grade and 6th grade, depending on the curricula. I actually think there's a giant misconception in the field, particularly around student-centered, like personalized models, that the older the students are, the better they are at it, or the more ready they are. It's actually kind of the opposite. I think we really coach students out of learning in a student-centered instructional approach. By the time they're in high school, they sort of expect information to be fed to them and sort of can get partial credit and keep it moving and sort of just want to kind of jump through a series of hoops. So we find that actually the younger students really thrive in this. When you get really, really lower grade levels, like K-2, you have to be super careful with tech, both on the tech literacy and the amount of screen time. But I think once you get 3rd grade and above, it's really a station rotation model on steroids, right? So this idea that you wouldn't stand in the front of the room and deliver like these long lectures, like that's not what 3rd grade teachers do anyways, right? So the students are actually kind of used to being in control of the learning environment to some degree, and actually teachers releasing. It's about structuring it in a way that actually maximizes for outcomes, right? Like, are we actually producing a playbook for execution that's super, super useful? So that's kind of the variance. I actually think it can be quite difficult to change sort of students' expectations around how learning is supposed to work when they get older. So, I was a high school math teacher and rolled this out in 12th graders, and they were not happy with me to start, right? They were just like, come on, just like, give me my lecture, give me my assignment, keep it moving. And I was like, no, we're gonna hold you to mastery. And if you don't demonstrate mastery, you're gonna get a reteach on that. So that's kind of how we approached it. There was a second part to the question. I think I can see it in the chat, which is, was there a second part to the question, Jeff?
Yeah, it was around from Camille acknowledging you kind of started touching a little bit about change management.
Yeah.
And was curious what proportion implement effectively and what you've learned about what supports effective implementation of the model.
I mean, this is the thing we're trying to figure out every single day. When we were running a curriculum agnostic solution that sort of honestly had virality to it, like anyone can learn it anywhere, there's a book about it, right? Studying implementation was difficult, right? You couldn't get in every single classroom. It was just kind of out there, and the various forms of implementation were super wide. So I'm going to focus on the curriculum embedded version of this. What I think has been really, really interesting is of the pilot educators that we deployed this with, 93% of the educators are using our adapted resources, which I think is like a super interesting stat, meaning separate of the actual implementation of our instructional model, they're finding these adapted resources really useful, and we're seeing them in almost every classroom. And then we're finding that about 70 to 75% of teachers are actually transforming their classroom by running some version of self-paced mastery-based learning. And I think that, first of all, we're very happy with that. I think that's a pretty intense shift for their instructional experience in a single year. But we're also trying to unlock and continue to refine, like, what is the actual journey? And how does that vary based on levels of experience for an educator, right? If you get an educator who comes in with pretty strong tech literacy, has already been playing around with stuff like this and this supercharges it, day one, they're flying, right? But if you bring in an educator who might have not great content knowledge at the moment, they're not really comfortable releasing control in the classroom, behavior management's a challenge, right? This is a pretty scary shift. And frankly, I'm not sure I'd want them to dive in, and just try it full on in the first month. So we're trying to start to kind of come up with the pathways and the journeys for educators. We need more time, though, to understand how you structure that depending on sort of the inputs.
We have a question came in that's sort of zooming out a level above that. So thinking about CBPL in general, the question was whether that encompasses a larger umbrella of PL that can include administrators, coaches, as well as teachers, and specifically how administrators might fit into effective PD.
Yeah, I would love to share about this. And this may be the thing I'm proudest of at our work at Leading Educators, is how we create a vertical spine that connects teachers to teacher leaders to coaches to principals to district leaders all up and down the chain. One fun fact, this is maybe the stat that I'm proudest of at the moment, from the research from Sean Reardon at Stanford and Tom Kane at Harvard. They found only 5 districts that improved more than a year's worth of growth in reading over the years of the pandemic from 2019 to 2024. Obviously, we know there's lots of slide that happened during COVID. 4 of the 5 that improved more than a year's worth of reading were Leading Educators partners. And all 4 had this thing where they connected teachers to teacher leaders to coaches to principals to principal managers. And everyone knew exactly how they supported the curriculum work. And so in Charleston, which had the greatest gains in the entire country in reading and math, the way that we did this was actually Teachers know exactly what it looks like. Maybe it's student discourse in EL education. Coaches know what to look for and how to coach on that. Principals know how to look for that in their learning walks. Principal managers know how to hold principals accountable for creating the learning conditions and ensuring that all the pieces line up. And so that really is the work of vertical coherence. And I think that's really been the place where we focus the most. And you can only do that if you're really approaching it as a partner, if you build on strengths, if you're starting by understanding what people want to do together and co-creating. And I think that's where so much of the work really is for us.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add on about the sort of the question of how administrators fit in? Why don't we, so you're going to see a poll coming up on your screen, and I will maybe close us out with one final question. Is there anything that you wish district leaders and other stakeholders knew that we haven't talked about already? Maybe just limit your responses to a minute while folks fill out the poll.
I will say this, even though I think many do know this, but I think it's hard to actually like see play out, is change takes time. And particularly when you're creating sort of disruptive change, it takes a lot of time. And if you're expecting to see results too fast and you're not looking at leading indicators that sort of suggest you're on an improvement curve, you're going to perpetually be disappointed and frustrated. I think this applies to like an instructional transformation shift like we do. I think this applies to AI. Like there's a lot wrong with AI, but there's a lot promising, and we have to be very careful of not overjudging solutions when they're sort of part of a learning curve that I think really matters to get us to an endpoint that's exciting.
I think two things that build on a lot of what Chong-Hao shared is, one, if we are not as district leaders thinking that our job is to support school leaders in supporting them and doing their job to support teachers, then we've got a problem, right? Like we need leadership at every level of the system to be excellent and focused on creating excellence at the instructional core, or the relationship between the content and the students and the teachers. And that's easier said than done. And a lot of the work that we do with district leaders and school leaders is helping them come up with implementation plans that are a year long, and the dream is to create multi-year implementation plans. That's hard to do because there's just so much going on in school systems, and contracts never last more than 1 year and all that jazz. But I think visionary leaders figure that out, and they nest within those year-long and multi-year-long plans what Kareem has been talking about, right? Like your indicators of success and your constantly progress monitoring, et cetera. I think some of this work, we think that there'll be some like, you know, sexy, shiny solution, and it's really about leadership and consistency and really vigilance around pursuing this goal and belief that 100% of students can learn on grade level.
And just also, in addition to all of that, because I agree, right, with everything they're both saying, Kareem and Sarah, I think this what this brings up for me, and I was just in a meeting with 20 of our organizations talking about our new AI scan that's going to be coming out at the end of the month. And we were talking a lot about change management, right? So a part of all of this are all of these changes that Kareem talked about in the classroom, changes across the vertical spine, having the vision, multi-year measurement. It just feels to me like a critical thing that we don't spend a lot of time talking about, is how are we thinking about change management and how critical that is to every one of these steps over a multi-year process, and then up and down the spine, and then the measurement piece of it. And so I was just hearing that in everybody's different responses. And I think we should attend to that more and name it as a core part of the work. And then we can study it more.
I just want to sort of complement Chong-Hao's comments related to the vertical spine and vertical coherence. I think what we've seen as we've been working more closely with individual districts and also thinking about these sort of trends in PL spending across the country is that the people making decisions about professional learning are often distributed across a variety of different departments sort of horizontally. And so you have, you know, one group making decisions about PL that's related to ELA, and another group making decisions about PL that's related to SEL, and so on. And so in addition to that vertical coherence, we're starting to think about how do we create or support districts and to create this horizontal coherence so that it's a coherent PL strategy and not 8 or 9 different PL strategies that are sort of interacting with each other in coherent ways.
I'm really inspired by the whole panel, and would just shout back out the Ripple research on building better PL. I think that one paper on, hey, these are the 6 things that we know matter most was so helpful for our team and kind of where to start. And I would just say sometimes there's a lot of cynicism right now in education where we can get to this place where we think like nothing works, or that we're under, there's so many competing mandates. And so I think this panel for me is just hopefulness about knowing that there are things that have a strong evidence base, that have a lot of movement and energy. And so if we could just channel our energy towards the things that have the most evidence, the most impact, I think we can make a lot of progress together, and just feel really inspired by everyone here.
Thank you. I'm also feeling really inspired. I think we have a couple more minutes, so maybe building off that evidence question, you're going to ask 1 or 2 more if we have enough time, and we'll share contact info for everyone at the end if there's folks you'd like to follow up with. We have one question for our researchers, so maybe connecting to what Chong-Hao just shared about the Building Back Better PL. Travis is wondering if there's any evidence-based understanding about effectiveness of PD that is not curriculum-based, so SEL, school climate, classroom culture, and things like that.
Sure. So I can start, and Stacey can add anything that I might miss. In general, I would say that the research on effectiveness of professional learning suggests that when it's either about content, focused on specific content, that might include embedding SEL strategies or thinking about climate and classroom culture, but in the context of particular content tends to be more effective. And then curriculum-based has the advantage of also providing materials to teachers that they can take away to use. And so I think we might hypothesize that SEL and school climate, classroom culture related professional learning that also has this connection to materials and content could be effective as well. But we don't sort of see a general trend that, SEL based PL is particularly effective. That doesn't mean that there are not examples of programs focused on those things that can and are effective.
I don't think I have anything to build on. I'm thinking a little bit about Chicago's work around culturally responsive CBPL, and where they had some evidence base that is not subject specific around ELA or math. So I think the important piece that Ariel highlighted is really that you have to have content and practice opportunities, right, as part of the work, and aligning those, which we've said, I think, and is in our Building Better PL paper. But I also am looking now at Sarah, whose team did some of that work, and wondering if there were any other learnings around that form of CBPL that felt worthwhile highlighting here.
I think also just connecting to your report, one of the 6 design features is also focused on building strong student relationships. And so this is sort of answering the opposite question, but I think it's also really important to integrate a focus on what could be referred to as SEL in all PL for teachers, if it's CBPL or not. We've tested out a lot of different student level motivation interventions. And I think that teachers need to understand that the gap between students learning at the highest levels is not always about knowledge and skills, but also about motivation. And there are many concrete things that teachers can do in order to enable that motivation. I think a really great book about this is from David Yeager's research, which is about what motivates 10 to 25-year-olds. We've experimented with some of those interventions in our partnerships, and it can have a really dramatic impact because sometimes students can accelerate their learning dramatically if they're motivated really, really well. And then there's also the other side of that, which is teacher motivation is also really important. And so how do you create sort of like a full PD and implementation model that is equally motivating to teachers and students? I feel like that should be like a giant line of research for all of us as well. And speaking to Chong-Hao's point about collaboration, I'm also so inspired by all of these panelists, and I think there are many opportunities for us to collaborate and work on solving these, I think, very solvable problems, even during difficult and dynamic times.
Yeah, this is like a shameless plug right now that Ripple is doing a brief on teacher-student relationship evidence tied to PL that we expect to have come out this summer. So if you're interested in digging into this, there will very soon be a resource that will tell you everything that we know about the evidence base in this area. You just teed that up perfectly, Sarah. Thank you.
I was gonna say, it's
I'm
not
also very
like it was
tired.
timely and relevant and answered the question. So thank you for sharing. And really just thank you to all of you. This has been an incredible discussion. I learned a lot. I was inspired. I'm grateful to all of you for being here and everyone who's able to tune in today. If you have any other questions that we weren't able to answer for our panelists, or you'd like to connect with them directly, you can see their contact information on the screen, and we'll also share that in an email for those of you who registered along with a recording from today. But thank you so much for being here, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.
Thank you.